So we start with our exciting first keynote, and you know, when we planned this conference, we really want to get new input from other disciplines. We are an interdisciplinary crowd here, but we need inspiration. And one of our burning issues, and we want to focus with our keynote on burning issues of our time, is of course climate change and the climate crisis. So I was thinking, whom can we invite for a keynote? And then Linda Steg came into my mind, because she is an amazing researcher, and at the same time she is very influential in influencing politics to how we can deal with climate crisis. I say more to her now, but I wrote her an email and said, do you think you like to come to an IAIR conference? And I expected some longer negotiations or to say, oh no, I don't know, it's not my discipline. But she said first, and I guess in 1 day difference or so, yes, I can do that. I said, wow, that's so cool. Thank you that you are here, Linda, today with us. Linda Steg is a professor of environmental psychology at the University of Groningen, Netherlands. She studies factors influencing sustainable behavior, the effects and acceptability of strategies aimed at promoting sustainable behavior, and public perception of technology and system changes. She's a member of the Royal Netherlands Academy of Sciences and the European Academy of Sciences and Arts. She's laureate of the Dutch Royal Decoration with appointment as the Knight of the Order of the Netherlands Lion, and laureate of the Stephen Prize of the Dutch Research Council. She is lead author of the IPCC special report on the 1.5 degrees goal and AR6, and participates in various interdisciplinary and international research programs in which she collaborates with practitioners working in industry, governments, and NGOs. And her keynote today is on intrinsic motivation to engage in climate action, one of the burning issues of our time. Technology will not save us. It's on us. And I'm really excited that you are here, Linda. So this is your floor.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. And one of the reasons I said yes immediately is because climate change is a global issue. It's very important to also consider cultural aspects that are related to the likelihood that people act to protect themselves against the risk of climate change and to mitigate climate change. So you have an important role to play. Most research is still being done in Western European countries and Northern America, and it's really important to also understand what is happening in the other parts of the world, mostly also because they're most likely to be affected by the negative impacts of climate change. So I'm a professor of environmental psychology. I study the relationship between people and their environment. So how does the environment impact on our well-being and behavior, but also how can we motivate people to engage in climate action? And I will focus today on the last part. Well, this is what was broadcasted in the news after one of the IPCC reports was launched last year, the AR6. Code red for human-driven global heating, warns the UN chief. So, human-driven global heating. And I have two questions for you before I start with my talk. Do you believe that this is commonly understood by the population, that climate change is happening and that it is caused by our behavior? So I will present you in a minute some data from the European Social Survey that embedded a module on energy and climate change. I think the data, I should know this by head, but it's about 5 years ago. And my first question to you, European Social Survey, data collected among big representative samples of the European population, 23 countries participated. What percentage of this sample do you think denies that climate change is happening? Just shout out number that you think, a percentage. So, 70, 45, 25, 45, yeah? Okay, then the next question. Of those who do believe climate change is happening, what percentage would deny it has anything to do with our behavior? So what percentage says this is purely a natural phenomena? 30, 60. Yeah, well, yeah, large, high percentages. Luckily, the picture is not that bleak. So this is the percentages of people that deny that climate change is happening. Those that firmly deny is only 2%. A little bit more doubt, say probably not, but the vast majority acknowledges climate change is happening. Similarly, the vast majority acknowledges it has to do with our behavior. So we tend to overestimate the number of climate deniers. Whatever audience I present this, I get the same types of numbers. Well, there might be different reasons. One might be that we have difficulties with assessing small percentages anyway, right? That's something that we are not very good in. We regress to the mean. And it might also be that in the media, there's a lot of attention to climate deniers because there's a principle that every point of view should be represented in the media. And that then you might easily get an idea, oh, there's a large proportion that denies climate change because there's a lot of attention for it. And there's also big lobbies making sure that this denier standpoint is being represented well in the media. But clearly, the issue is not that people don't believe climate change is happening. It's not that they don't believe that our behavior is impacting on climate change. The big question is, how can we motivate people to act on climate change? And that's where I will be focusing on today. Now, if you talk about climate mitigation, that means behavior that would reduce the impact of our behavior on the climate. There are many different things that we can do. We can use renewable energy sources or accept that wind parks are being established close to where we live. We can recycle more, change our dietary pattern, eat less animal-based products, for example. Transport ourselves more sustainably, so fly less, but rather take a train or shorter distances, walk or cycle, buy an electric vehicle rather than a fuel-driven car, insulate our homes, but also more political-oriented behavior like protesting to demand more forceful climate policies, or vote for parties that would likely implement climate policy. Well, since there are many different things that we can do, and if we want to limit climate change, we should also engage in many of these actions, unless we want to capture CO2 in the underground, which will also be very expensive. So most climate scenarios assume drastic changes in our behavior. So that's why we focus on what motivates people to engage in many of these actions over and again in many different contexts. Well, one of the factors we consider here are values. And values, we define it similar, you might know Schwartz's value theory, so our research builds on that theory. We define, similar to what he proposes, values as general goals that we strive for in our life. So what we deem generally important to accomplish. And if you look at climate actions, or more sustainable actions more generally, 4 types of values appear particularly relevant. 2 of these make people focus on their own interest. It's hedonic values. We want to have a pleasurable life. We want to reduce effort, enhance comfort. And egoistic values imply that we want to enhance our resources, save money, for example, or enhance our status. And generally, people with strong hedonic and egoistic values are less likely to engage in climate actions because oftentimes this is somewhat more effortful, costly, or inconvenient. The collective action problem where Adam was already referring to. Not always. Sometimes climate action is also good for your money, for your wallet. So if you save energy at home, you would also save money, clearly. And cycling on a sunny day like today might be quite pleasurable to many people as well. But many times it is somewhat more expensive. Organic produce is more expensive than regular produce, for example. And if you want to insulate your home, you need to make major investments. Two other types of values make people focus on the collective interest. And that's first altruistic values. We care about other people and are also keen on enhancing the well-being of other people. And second, biospheric values. People care about protecting nature and the environment as such. And clearly, those who more strongly endorse these both types of values are more likely to act on climate change, because climate action will clearly mostly benefit other people, future generations as well, and the environment. We did different studies where we included our value questionnaire, and people across the world endorse these type of values, and people across the world also quite strongly endorse altruistic and biospheric values. So not only in the Netherlands, where we clearly started, because I'm Dutch, but we did also studies in other European countries, and I just have, some pictures of the countries where we did our research. Norway, Eastern Europe, Budapest, this is Russia. My Russian colleague was quite skeptic. He said in a post-socialist country like Russia, people are really hedonically oriented. They don't care about the environment. We found that these people care also about the protecting nature and the environment. Also in the Baltic states like Lithuania, Japan, the US, Argentina, where climate change and environmental issues were hardly discussed for a long time, but also in Iran and among poor populations, for example, in Mexico and Kenya and Ethiopia, we also did some studies. And we even found that in Mexico, poor people more strongly cared about protecting nature and the environment, so more strongly endorsed biospheric values than the richer people. And this might sound counterintuitive, because it's often thought, well, caring about the environment and climate change, well, you can only afford to do so if your basic needs are being fulfilled. But it might be that these people care about the environment also because they most strongly depend on nature and the environment. So there is a more clear benefit in it, or because it is more a part of their religion to protect nature and the environment. So how do these values affect our actions? I'll show you a little movie that demonstrates the basic principle.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away.
That's right, madam.
It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you?
Action.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
Well, this is just demonstrating the basic principle. So values affect where you attend to, which consequences you consider when making choices, and the likelihood that you opt for different options. So those with strong biospheric values are more attentive to the environmental consequences of choices and more likely to choose options that benefit the environment most. While those who have, for example, strong hedonic values would be particularly attentive to more pleasurable, the consequences for options for their pleasure or comfort or whether they are convenient, and base their choices on the likelihood that their hedonic values will be affected. Well, we did a couple of studies that clearly demonstrate this. I give you one example. This was an experimental study among a panel of the Dutch population. Half of the group saw a documentary on the negative impacts of bottled water. And bottled water is not only bad because of the plastics involved, but also because this is transported, oftentimes all over the world. So we can buy exotic waters here and the other way around. So there's a lot of energy being consumed by just transporting it to our homes. So half of them saw this documentary, half of them saw an unrelated documentary, and next we asked people whether about their knowledge about the negative impacts of bottled water and whether they would reduce the use of bottled water in the future and accept policies that would make the use of bottled water less attractive. And across the board, what we found is that those who saw the documentary were more knowledgeable, were more aware of the negative impacts of bottled water, but there were no differences between intentions and policy support between both groups. And that's very much in line with all kinds of meta-analysis on the impact of information campaigns. It enhances awareness, but hardly affects intentions and behavior. Then we looked into the role of values. And what we found is that those with stronger biospheric values, not only their awareness levels were higher, but they also reported stronger intentions to reduce bottled water use and to accept policies that would make bottled water use less attractive. While those with weaker biospheric values, only their awareness differed from the other group, but no difference between intentions and behaviors. So it means that these types of campaigns particularly motivate those who are already motivated to protect the environment. And then it can be effective when people are not knowledgeable, which is sometimes the case, like here with bottled water, and meat consumption is another example where many people were not aware of the climate impacts, but oftentimes they already know. So then these types of campaigns are not very effective. Now, next question to you. What values could we best target if we want to promote pro-environmental actions? And I now tell you something about a study, a field study we did in the US, Virginia, and followed up with some questionnaire studies because we wanted to understand the processes, so what is underlying the impacts. But first my question, what happens in the field? So at a gas station, we place sandwich boards with flyers that indicated that people could check their tires for free. If your tires are properly inflated, you save gasoline. And if you save gasoline, you save money, but you also emit CO2. So what type of appeal would be most effective? Should we emphasize you save money by doing this? Should we emphasize you protecting the environment by doing this? And of course, we have a control condition as a reference point. So can you raise your hand if you think the environmental appeal would be most effective? No one. One. Financial? Majority. Why do you think the financial appeal is most effective? Anyone? Yeah? Everyone cares about money, but oftentimes, that's what I often hear. Also, it's tangible, you have it immediately in your pocket, and CO2 emissions, people don't understand what a kilogram of CO2 is, but it's also longer term. And if I ask people, just the participants of the study, they also say money is the best thing to emphasize in these types of appeals. Most all audiences I have presented it, the majority thinks the financial appeal is most effective. It was the opposite. The environmental appeal was the most effective, the financial, the least effective. How come? Well, first of all, people think that the exact same behavior is less worth the effort when you emphasize the financial consequences as compared to the environmental consequences. We found it in a study on eco-driving behaviors. We presented people with a series of eco-driving behaviors like not idling or removing your roof rack. That would all save a little bit of gasoline, it would save you some money, and it would emit less CO2. And if we present the exact same behavior, people think it's more worth the effort to engage in that behavior when we emphasize the environmental consequences as compared to the financial consequences. It's only a few bucks. It's not worth the effort. Note that this is about these types of behaviors, right? If we would have focused on insulating your home and you would save thousands of euros, the picture would clearly be different, I would assume. We didn't test it, but I would assume. So people don't think it's worth the effort. That's, by the way, that's what you see here. If you emphasize CO2 emission reductions, people report it to be more worth the effort than if you emphasize money for a couple of different types of eco-behaviors. The other reason is that many people care about protecting nature and the environment. These are data from the same European Social Survey, a limited survey, I should say, because there's a series of, I think, 12 questions on values. Only 4 of them are relevant for this presentation. So there's 1 altruistic value, 1 egoistic value, 1 biospheric, and 1 hedonic value. But what this picture shows is that across all these countries, many people strongly care about protecting nature and the environment. They strongly endorse biospheric values and less strongly endorse particularly egoistic values. And this is not only a matter of social desirability, because it's not only cheap talk, because people who do endorse more strongly biospheric values also are more likely to act upon it. So these values are related to their actions. Well, the most important reasons why do these environmental appeals motivate us is that doing something good for the environment makes us feel good, makes us feel meaningful. And this was already known for a long time. Aristotle called this eudaimonia. I think it's very much in line what you mentioned from Seligman, the flourishing, right? Doing something meaningful, contributing to the greater good, makes us feel good. And this is particularly the case, we found in studies, when people engage in a behavior voluntarily, because then you can say, well, I'm the person who did so I can get the credits, rather than being forced upon you. And this is also stronger when people more strongly endorse biospheric values. And this is, we also found this effect when we measure it implicitly. So not only when people are aware of what we are after, but also with implicit association tasks, we find the same effect. So the mechanism is, if you realize you engage in sustainable behavior, you think you did something meaningful, this reflects positively on you, and that makes that you feel good about the behavior. And the interesting thing is that when people anticipate feeling good, they're also more likely to act in a similar way in the future. So anticipating these positive feelings of doing good motivates climate actions as well. Well, we wanted to know, is this only a metaphor, or can people also literally feel good in line with what Andreoni once proposed? He called it a warm glow. If you do something good, he was talking about pro-social behavior mostly, you feel good and you experience a warm glow, which is a metaphor, of course, and we wanted to know, can people literally feel warmer when they engage in pro-environmental action? So what we did, we placed people in the lab, students of ours, first in a psychology lab, later in a biology lab, and they have cool climate-controlled rooms where you can keep the room temperature constant which is relevant, as you will notice in a minute. So people completed the carbon footprint calculator. Next, they indicated, they got feedback on their score. They either learned your relatively pro-environmental score much better than the average student, or your relatively not so environmentally friendly perform a score far worse than the average students. And then we ask them to report the room temperature. And what you see is that when people got feedback that they acted relatively pro-environmentally, they reported higher room temperatures than when people think they are not so pro-environmental. So this indicates that they literally feel warmer when they have the impression they did something good. We found this effect in both studies. We also measured the actual skin temperature by placing devices on their fingertips. We found an effect in the first study, not in the second study that included less respondents, and we only found it among female respondents. And we didn't realize it, but when we showed the research to the human biologists where we worked with, they said, yeah, of course you only find this among female respondents. We only include female respondents in our study because it's about how strongly or fast your blood vessels respond to external stimuli. And this happens much faster among females. So they only include female respondents. I didn't know. But anyway, either the effect is only in people's minds and not reflected in actual skin temperature, and we found it accidentally in one study and not in the other, or there is an effect, but then the effect size is rather small. And the process is like this. If you realize you act pro-environmentally, this reflects positively on you, a positive self-signal, and that makes that you experience the room to be warmer. So it is via people's self-concept. Okay, now the last part of my talk, I will focus on how can we motivate people who are not that strongly care about the environment with relatively weaker biospheric values. Well, one of the factors that plays a role is identity. Self-identity and social identity. I will tap on both of these. Now, first, self-identity. We call it environmental self-identity, which we define as the extent to which you see yourself as a pro-environmental person. Well, you all know that if you have a certain identity, you're motivated to act in line with that identity because we're motivated to be consistent. So people with a stronger environmental self-identity are more likely to act sustainably. And stronger biospheric values make people more likely to see themselves as a pro-environmental person. But identity also depends on our past behavior. Self-perception theory of BEM has proposed this a long time ago already. So if you realize you acted pro-environmentally in the past, you're also likely to more strongly see yourself as a pro-environmental person and act accordingly. The opposite is also true. If you realize you did not act pro-environmentally, your environmental self-identity will be weaker and you are less likely to act sustainably in the future. And the interesting thing is that many campaigns focus on the negative. They focus on the many things that people don't do. From this perspective, it should be important to emphasize the many things that people already do, because this makes it more likely that our environmental self-identity is stronger. And that's what the Dutch government did like a year ago. They launched a campaign, Iedereen doet wat in Dutch, everyone does something, emphasizing that many people engage in pro-environmental actions, hoping this would strengthen their environmental self-identity and promote sustainable actions. Well, this is about I am green. What about we are green? What about the impact of groups that we are part of on our behavior? This matters as well, and I give you two examples. First, are groups in your local neighborhood. In the Netherlands, but also I guess in many countries in the world, there are bottom-up initiatives trying to promote sustainability from the bottom up in their own neighborhoods, collaborating and trying to reduce their environmental impact, like Energy Initiative. And that's where I will focus. This study focused on. It's a network of community energy initiatives that try to promote sustainable energy use in their neighborhood. And the company that coordinated that network, they were interested in, well, does it matter to establish such an initiative, or is it mainly motivating those who are already motivated? So who will join such an initiative? The green people, clearly. Well, do they need such an initiative, or would they have acted green anyway? That was one of the main questions. And what we found is that it matters. So people who are more strongly engaged in a community energy initiative are more likely to act sustainably, to engage in sustainable energy behavior. Also, when you control for individual motivations, like biospheric values and environmental self-identity. So it matters. Being engaged provides an additional motivation to act. Another interesting finding was what makes that people become engaged in such an initiative in the first place. Is it because they anticipate saving money if they save energy? Is it because they care about the environment? Or is it because they want to meet and interact with others in their neighborhood? Well, when we ask people, they say money is important. Again, money is important. And I become a member because I care about the environment, but interacting with other people is not a real important motive for me. But if you next see what predicts the level of engagement, the picture is slightly different. Money is not an important motive. The most important motives are caring about the environment and wanting to meet and interact with other people. And that's interesting because it means that people might become a member for different reasons than the environment, meeting other people, but once they become a member, become engaged, they act sustainably. So you can motivate the less motivated in this way. What we also found is that being engaged in such an initiative not only predicts pro-environmental behavior, but also what we call communal behavior, behavior that benefit the collective. So being a member has not only environmental, but also social benefits. Well, the other way that groups can influence us, well, one of the major groups that we spend quite a lot of time in is our organization. And many organizations now have adopted policies to reduce their environmental impact. It's coined corporate environmental sustainability, which we define like whether a company has the mission to reduce their environmental impact, but also has implemented policy to do so. And we wanted to know, might this motivate workers, employees to act more pro-environmentally at work, even when we control for their biospheric values? What we found is that people at work are also more motivated to act sustainably at work when they're more strongly endorse biospheric values, indicating that these values are general goals, not only affecting our private lives, but also behavior at work. We also found that people are more likely to act pro-environmentally at work when the company more strongly endorses corporate environmental responsibility. And the interesting thing, which I didn't predict, that this corporate environmental responsibility particularly promotes pro-environmental actions among those with relatively weaker biospheric values. So that means that if you're a member of a group, of an organization that has a strong mission to reduce its environmental impact, you're also more likely to do so, particularly if you don't care about the environment as that much yourself. Because those with strong biospheric values would act pro-environmentally anyway. Those with weaker environmental values can use this extra push to act pro-environmentally. We also looked into the process through which this corporate environmental responsibility affects our behavior, because you could assume an intrinsic and an extrinsic route. Extrinsic route is, well, my company finds it important, so my manager probably finds it important. If I don't do it, I will be punished. If I do it, I will be rewarded. So social norms will steer the process to pro-environmental action? Or is it more the intrinsic route, which is based on social identity theory? My company finds it important. I'm part of my company. I identify with this group. So I also find it important, and that motivates me to act accordingly. And we find most evidence for the intrinsic route, which is interesting and important, because if people adopt the company goals as their own goals, they're likely to act accordingly in any situation, also when not being watched. We also found similar results if you ask people about the company where they buy from, so for customers, and also for citizens and their perceptions of whether their government cares about the environment. So it matters what you perceive to be the goals of the group that we belong to. Well, the problem here is that individuals often underestimate others' biospheric values. So they tend to think that other people care less about other people and the environment, so less strongly endorse altruistic and biospheric values, and that others more strongly endorse hedonic and egoistic values than they do. So people underestimate this. And this might, of course, inhibit climate action, right? Because you might think, yeah, if others don't act, why should I act? Because my contribution will be futile. But if you communicate that other people do care, or that organizations do care, or that the government does care, then people might recognize, oh, other people find it important as well. If these groups are important, they might adopt their group goals as their own goals, and then it might promote climate action. And that is a line of research that we are now just setting up. So we found that people underestimate the extent to what other people care about the environment. We now also want to see whether this is similar among what we think about the willingness of organizations or the values of organizations and the government, and the other way around. Because my idea is that if we underestimate the values of others more broadly, then everyone might wait for everyone and nothing might happen in the end, because companies might think, oh, well, I can develop green products, but consumers don't want to buy them. And consumers might think, well, the companies don't want to do anything, so it's useless that I do something. So it's important that everyone has correct perceptions of the values and willingness of others. Well, finally, what I want to emphasize is that climate action is not the sole responsibility of individuals. The things that we can do, the things that we can afford to do, depend very much on choices that other actors make. So if we want to promote climate action, it's not sufficient to say to people, act more climate friendly, act more climate friendly. You should also ensure that it is feasible and attractive to do so. So system changes are needed as well. If you want people to eat vegan diets, well, you might need to tell them how a proper vegan meal can look like and that it can be tasty, because many people have been trained to cook in very different ways. If you want people to transport themselves in environmentally friendly ways, you need to establish the right infrastructure, cycling, public transport, or charging stations for electric vehicles. Laws can help to make sure that the climate-friendly options are widely available and that climate-unfriendly options are no longer available. And pricing instruments like subsidies can help those with lower incomes to make the necessary investments. So climate action is not the sole responsibility of individuals. System changes are needed, and system changes can be promoted or set in place by companies, businesses, and governments. So, conclusions. Multiple motivations affect climate action. Intrinsic motivation is an important factor that promotes climate action. And people are more intrinsically motivated when they strongly care about nature and the environment, or when they see themselves as the pro-environmental person. But this is not sufficient. People can only act on this intrinsic motivation consistently when the context supports and enables these actions. I always end with a slide of people in the group, because this is clearly group work. I have been presenting research of many people in our group, so a big thank you to them as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much for this inspiring talk, Linda. We have time for some questions. Please wait until the students are with you with the mic, because otherwise the online participants will not hear your questions. So, are there any questions?
Thank you so much for your wonderful talk. I have a question about socioeconomic status of your participants. How does that interact with your experimental conditions to influence the interpretation of results?
Yeah, thanks for this question. We do include this in our studies, of course. For values, I can say that it's often thought that biospheric values are stronger among the richer people, because they can afford to care about the nature and the environment, etc. That's not what we found. From data from 7 different European countries, we looked into the extent to which different socio-demographics predict the strength of values. And if we consider income, education level, gender, household composition, and something, I forget something, but together, these explain like 7, 8, 9% of the variance. So it's not that you can say this type of person is more likely to endorse biospheric values strongly compared to that one. For the behaviors, it matters, of course, for where we focus on. So if you focus on behaviors that need investments, like electric vehicles, then socioeconomic status plays a key role, income mostly, because you need money to be able to afford an electric vehicle. For others, it is less relevant. We find that people with higher incomes also are more likely to accept all kinds of policies that require investments, while poorer people find options that would save money as well more acceptable, which makes sense, of course. And more generally, if you look at the environmental impacts of behavior patterns, then this is clearly much higher among the richer people than among the poorer people, even though people that have a lot of money might more easily buy organic produce. In the end, their impact is oftentimes much higher because they fly more, they live in bigger houses, they have more cars, drive longer distances. So the impact is strongly related to income. Because if you have more money, you can spend it more, and then you likely spend it on climate unfriendly alternatives as well. Yeah?
Hello, thank you very much for your presentation. It was very revealing. And I have a question, and it's actually about the role of interculturalists. So all of us here in the room, and many also online and everywhere. And in the first line of your conversation or your speech, you said it's a global issue, and of course it is. It's very severe. It's 1 before 12. And you said it's important to consider the cultural factor. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that and our specific role and how we can boost ourselves? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this question. So I think the one important thing to do is to study populations in different parts of the world and to see whether the processes and the theories that I have now discussed also are relevant to understand behaviors across the world and not only among some populations. Second, I think that factors like values can be an important entry point to study it and study whether value patterns differ across the world and whether this is linked to different types of actions. The other way where it might play a key role is that collaboration is needed, right? Global collaboration is needed. And you see in climate negotiations, there are a lot of difficult topics to discuss, because it's also about responsibility. So who needs to take action, or who should pay for climate adaptation measures in countries that are most affected, but are typically not those who have caused the problem. So international collaboration between different cultures is needed to mitigate climate change to a substantial extent. And I think your expertise is definitely needed here. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. I would like to ask you a question related to your country. In the last few days, perhaps most of us could see from the Netherlands the pictures of the issues about the cow reduction program and farmers' protests. Would you comment on this, as it is, I think it is related to the topic of your speech?
Yeah, thanks for this question. I can say different things about it. First, here it is probably also a small percentage of the farmers that are really upset. There's also a group that is quite willing to change, and there's a very large group of farmers that don't have any cows or animals. And there's a lot of organic farmers as well. Here the system plays a role as well. One of the major things that plays a role is that for a long time these farmers have been encouraged to invest in the current way of business, to get bigger farms, and they invested a lot of money in this. They got loans from the banks, so they're stuck in a way. So if you now only tell them you should do your practices are no longer allowed, of course they are really upset. So I think what's important to do is also help them to change their way of business, to help them to become more sustainable. And banks have to play an important role as well, because they have a lot of influence on the likelihood that they can change their business model. I read just yesterday in a newspaper that quite some farmers wanted to change into more organic farming, and it was hardly possible for them to get the required money from the bank, because the bank considered this a high-risk investment. So here system changes are needed as well. And I think one of the major things that went wrong here is that for a long time, the issue was already known for a long time, but policymakers didn't act. They just still supported the current system and made it worse and worse and worse, because it becomes even more difficult to change it now. Does it answer your question?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for your very impressive lecture. Considering that we are intercultural psychologists, I'm thinking about cultural factors, of course. When I thinking about it, I think also about things like religious teachings. Which are different for different believers, and it would be about different ways of understanding of nature. For example, Christians are more Christians think about humans and nature, that they are more separated, and Buddhists or Hinduists like they are united, and probably it
makes difference, what they think, what they feel, and what they act. What do you think about it?
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you
for
very
this
much.
question. I agree. I would assume it matters. I saw some studies on religion, but I don't have a complete overview of this type of studies. So some of them showing that it doesn't predict that much, but these were still limited to some types of religions. I would assume that more indigenous religions, that the picture might be quite different. And I didn't see studies on that, but because there the connection with nature is much stronger, and yeah, nature is part of the self almost. And that might also promote climate actions, of course. So that's a good addition to your question, another topic to be discussed. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Michaela, does it work? Okay. Linda will be with us, I guess, until tomorrow.
Or tonight.
Or tonight.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you have some more
just come
questions
to me. Yeah.
you like to discuss with Linda, do that. I want to say thank you so much with some greetings from the City of Roses. Pretty organic.
Ooh, nice.
So this is for
Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Linda. Thank you.
Thanks.